Welcome to Crossover the Pond, brought to you by 21 Media Productions and Sports Social. He's Drew Lasker, I'm Josh Sexton, and this is another episode as we continue our NBA basketball journey, a short Hezi tween and stutter step away here in the UK. Drew, when we first started this podcast, we weren't really sure how many episodes of it we were going to do. We weren't sure how deep into the season we'd end up going. Obviously, you always come into these things with optimism, and you always like to think that at least you'll get to the end of the season. And I don't think there's any end in sight for us. Let's just say that first and foremost before anyone starts to get worried listening to the words I'm saying here. But going back to those first weeks of the season, the fact that we're now here with the San Antonio Spurs and a New York Knicks NBA Finals. How are you feeling about it? Are you surprised at the two names? If you sort of think back to, well, Drew in October, November time, what are you thinking ahead of that series?
Yeah, I would be interested to go back and listen to some of those earlier episodes to kind of see like where both of us were leaning at the time. I know one thing for a fact, that neither of us saw San Antonio taking this journey back then, just because they were coming off a 35-win season. So very difficult to predict that Wemby would take this big of a jump, that the young guys would look so seasoned so early. Harper just looking like a 28-year-old veteran. On the other side with New York, I don't think I personally took them seriously until the NBA Cup. And when I was like saying that I wouldn't be surprised if they made it through, you just never knew how the East was going to reveal itself. But, credit to New York for taking advantage of a little bit of clutter there and uncertainty amongst other teams. They were probably the team, when you look at it now, that are the most together, the most solid, the most consistent, the most options, the most depth. They got everything that you need in 2026 NBA basketball to be able to succeed and to win. So I say all of that by saying that I don't think you could have asked for a better final. Like, from a fan perspective, I said this about San Antonio and OKC, like both of these teams, they look in the mirror, their reflection of themselves when it comes to the depth, the options that they have. The only separator is the age. Like, New York is a little bit more, experience. But then, from the business side of basketball, think about Adam Silver. Like, you got New York, the biggest market in the NBA Finals, tick. Then you have, when you look at these deals that they have with Amazon Prime and, Peacock and all these other things that they've incorporated to try to tailor to the European market, what other team would you want in the finals that's going to have people engaged besides the San Antonio Spurs? Because you got Wemby coming out of France, which is a huge basketball country, and then you got the biggest star in the world. So I think it's just a match made in heaven from a business standpoint, from a fan standpoint. When I look at both of these teams, I am really excited that we are in store for proper basketball, because these are two teams. This is not a one-man band. Like, you could easily see 8 or 9 players that could lead their teams in scoring combined. 4 from New York, 4 from San Antonio. So it's not just one guy you can key on, whereas OKC, you got to take care of the head of the snake. There's no head of the snake here for both teams. And this is why it makes it so intriguing.
Absolutely, yeah, and you mentioned about all the characteristics that you need. You've been talking about them all year. We've basically not come up with, but now adopted this acronym of SLAP that the Chicago Bulls director of basketball operations has been using, that size, length, athleticism and physicality. And I think it was actually polite of the Cleveland Cavaliers really to get out of the way as quickly as possible, because ultimately what we've seen over the past few weeks is, one of the best teams, definitely the best team in the East in the New York Knicks, but one of the best teams in the NBA in the New York Knicks waiting in the wings, while the other two best teams in the NBA were dueling out against each other. And I've been a little bit sad, I'll be honest, Drew, since Game 7 at some of the narratives that have come from this, because and maybe it just happens. I was almost thinking about before how, we were saying after game 1 of all these playoffs when they first started, like, don't overreact to game 1s. I'm kind of almost thinking now, like, don't overreact to game 7s. Like, everyone is saying to the Thunder that should be, trading away all these people and stuff. I want to sort of pick through some of these narratives really, and sort of almost look at how this series was lost for the OKC Thunder, because really to me it was on a knife edge. Like the thing that we can't do now is be like reductive about what the Thunder brought to this series. Yes, the games between game one and game seven maybe weren't quite as entertaining as game one and game seven were. I thought injuries robbed us of quite a lot of that entertainment, to be honest. I thought the Thunder brought it though, and I include Chet Holmgren in that, who of course has come away from game seven with very little credit for how much he, fell off really in that game. But for me, he comes away from the series in general with at least some credit. The OKC Thunder clearly missed Jalen Williams throughout the series, then clearly missed AJ Mitchell once he went down as well. Another guy who can, vaguely create a shot at least, that was taken away from this series from the OKC Thunder's point of view. We had Dylan Harper go down in this, De'Aaron Fox miss half of this series as well. So I wasn't surprised really those games in between felt like real in between games. But the one thing that we did get from this series, and I go back to what I said at the sort of start of this point really, is that these were the two best teams in the NBA. Both of them to me brought it every single night. I was absolutely not shocked at all to see it go to seven, and even to have game seven. Listen, it felt like a Spurs blowout in the end, I understand that, but it was only decided by 8 points in the end. So anyone who is being reductive to the OKC Thunder here, I just don't really have time for it, because I'd rather celebrate more of what the San Antonio Spurs had going on for them and going from across this season, let alone just this series, and also celebrate the fact that the Thunder have given us an all-time classic series here between two all-time great teams.
You're absolutely right. When you look at it from the perspective of this, if OKC wins game seven, are you pushing the panic button? No. So, if you were to ask the OKC Thunder at the very beginning of the season, hey, you're going to be in a conference final against one of the best teams in the West. You're going to be without your all NBA player. You're going to be without the the I don't want to say resurgence, the surgence of AJ Mitchell, who has proven that he is miles ahead of the contract he's on, and maybe we need to look at him having a bigger role next year. But you're going to take them all the way to the brink, game seven. I think they would have been like, that's exactly why we built this team that way, with this depth, to be able to, put a band-aid over things when there's injuries, when there's player performances that have dipped. Because if you look at anybody else in the NBA, if they lose their second best player, are they taking San Antonio to a game seven? So when you look at it from that perspective, there's no need to hit the red button. Like, you're exactly where you should be. Like, you gave yourself a chance. Obviously, things didn't work your way. If you want to magnify it, you do have to look at the Chet situation specifically because, one thing we've learned about the NBA is that it is tough to win consistently. And if you stay the same, you get left behind. There's going to be 8 new NBA champions in the last 8 years. So you have to continue to reinvent yourself, to evolve. And you have to look at San Antonio and say, well, that big alien there, he is not leaving. So if there's a situation to where Chet can turn into something that you could compete with Wemby over the long haul, then I look at it. But then on the other hand, like, I just look at Chet's situation as that his offense haven't caught up to his defense. He's still young, man. He's 22 years old. His offense can develop. He just has to decide what he's going to be, because it feels like he doesn't have, enough wiggle on the perimeter to really get downhill off the dribble. And then he doesn't have enough physicality inside to really take advantage of, of mismatches down low. So he has to pick one style and live with it and just go to work this summer of what he really wants to be. But it's not anything that can't be developed. The mindset, maybe you can argue and say that, maybe that affects him for years on end, because that is a real thing. But, I'm not just going to give up on a guy because he had a bad playoff run or a bad series. There's other things he brings to the table, and maybe, you just have to look at your roster construction. There does have to be some tweaks, but I just look at loose ends on the outer edges that you have to continue to sharpen up.
Absolutely, and I'm pleased you've said about how, the real issue really with Chet, and listen, I think he did take a huge leap this season. I don't want to sort of overlook the leap that he did take this season. He was all NBA third team and more than deserving of that. Like, if he was all NBA second team, I don't think anyone is really batting an eyelid besides maybe a guy or two who misses out from that team, really. So Chet did take a leap offensive this season when he was asked to be the second option. This Jalen Williams injury is going to come away as one of the big head scratchers from this season, really. He came into it with this hamstring issue. There was a wrist issue at one point, but then mostly it's just been this hamstring issue over and over again this season. And you're a guy, Drew, who in your career dealt with hamstring issues too, so maybe you can give us, a bit of insight into that. But for me, Chet did step up into that role. And one of the things, when I've defended James Harden and stuff on this podcast before, yes, James Harden is an older guy, was I talked about like the load of a season when you are basically having your role in the team inflated artificially, where actually the minute Jalen Williams does come back in for whatever stretch of games he comes back in for, suddenly you deflate that role again, and then you inflate it again when Jalen Williams goes out, and it's that constant adaptation that Chet Holmgren had to make throughout the season, which is why I think he comes away from the season still with a ton of credit, and why I don't think any conversations that happen in the in the Thunder front office, I should say, will be as reductive as some of the conversations that are happening on social media right now. Because yes, offensively Chet didn't bring it, and yes, that game seven is kind of inexcusable, really, and I'm sure Chet will feel that as much as anybody else feels that watching that game, that it was an inexcusable offensive game for him. But as you say, Drew, there's still so much he brings. And one of the things that upsets me a little bit, and we talked about it with Jalen Duren earlier in the playoffs too, is how often these conversations just become about money. Where suddenly now it's like, oh, well, Chet Holmgren, has no answer for Wembanyama, so suddenly that money looks off. And it's like, well, no, it doesn't, because for one, he doesn't have to play Victor Wembanyama week in, week out. Yes, it may be that the Western Conference Finals for the next few years always have to run through Victor Wembanyama, but also teams are smart enough where they're going to start to figure out little things. And, I wish all of those teams all the best in figuring out how on earth you stop Victor Wembanyama, but who's to say that the Thunder won't be able to figure something out, and that Chet Holmgren can't be a part of, whatever they figure out. Guys are even saying now that, and we'll talk about this a little bit more come the end of the podcast, but guys saying now that OG Anunoby is a secret weapon to how the New York Knicks can deal with Victor Wembanyama. So it's not just necessarily on Chet Holmgren for me that the Thunder couldn't completely stop Victor Wembanyama. I think the Thunder needed to turn up more offensively in this series. I think defensively they did mostly bring exactly what I expected them to bring. The Spurs brought defensively what I expected them to bring, and it was a brilliant defensive series. And I think the next one will go by the same book as that as well, where both defenses are going to be on an elite level. But like, I don't want to hear anyone pocket watching Chet Holmgren over this off season and taking away from the contract that he's earned for himself, because he's earned it by being, was he second in DPOY or DPOY in contention at least last season, second in DPOY this season, all team third in the NBA this season. Yeah, I'm sort of not here for how reductive those conversations have become, effectively off the strength of one game, really.
Yeah, I love the fact that you mentioned the money aspect of it. Hey, look, if you really look at it, in my opinion, there's probably only like 8 to 10 guys who deserve a max deal. However, there's 30 teams. So someone has to get paid, right? And there's going to be the numbers game. Some people are probably going to get paid what you think is overpaid, because that's just the way that the economics work in the NBA. So there's going to be 2 or 3 players on a team that make a max deal. And when you really look at it, there's not 30 guys in the NBA that deserve a max deal. But so I mean, if you're telling me that a guy who made a defensive team and also an all NBA team doesn't deserve it, then who deserves it? So you can't really look at the money aspect of it. It's just going to be about, if I'm Sam Presti, I'm being patient. You will be able to know by game 41 if Chet is up for the job or not, because I'm going to be really focused on his mentality going into next year, his off season. And if you see that fire, that hunger's not there, and he's, there's some hangover mentally, then you can look to pull the trigger. But look, they're in no position to rush that. Like, let's see, that might be the best thing that happens to you. Like, as an athlete, disappointment, failure is what fuels us. It's not success. So, let's see how he responds to probably the first time ever in his life that he's experienced some adversity.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of what the OKC Thunder do next, we'll just touch on that before we do come on to talk about the San Antonio Spurs because it almost goes hand in hand with the Chet Holmgren conversation. Listen, Drew, you've been laughing because I've been a guy who's been trying to shop Giannis Antetokounmpo all over the NBA. If I am Sam Presti, I'm absolutely not pulling that trigger. I do believe that Sam Presti will stay patient with that. I don't think that Giannis is the answer to this OKC Thunder team because I don't think it requires a big swing for them to be back in contention next year. I just think they will naturally be in contention whether they kept this core together or not. And it's actually the sort of fat around the edges that I'm looking at really. I look at that Isaiah Hartenstein contract and his contribution over this playoff series. I felt like he grew into it and dealt with Wembanyama better as it went on. But if you need Chet to be your starting center, unless you're just going to decide that, actually the answer to this now is that Chet Holmgren is definitely a four, and we just need to make sure that he, relies on his shot more than he did this series, then by all means keep Isaiah Hartenstein. If you're going to decide that Chet Holmgren is your five and he's your five for the future and you're paying him as such, then Isaiah Hartenstein's 30 million and it being a team option looks like one lever that I can pull. Luguentz Dort on an 18 million expiring as well with a team option. I'm looking at him and being like, our biggest issue against San Antonio Spurs that we don't have offense. I think the OKC Thunder have enough good defenders who also bring something offensively, where a guy like Luguentz Dort is expendable, and especially at $18 million, which is kind of in the upper range really for an NBA role player. I mean, look at Alex Caruso, who's also got paid 80 million this season. Alex Caruso brought it on both ends of the floor in this playoff series. So if you are a guy like Luguentz Dort, I think you're on the hot seat there. A couple of other guys in the 10 million range, Isaiah Joe and Aaron Wiggins, who were barely even able to touch the court really in this playoff series. If you got rid of those two guys and brought in something that, did represent more offense, that's 20 million that you can, almost throw into a 20 million guy who again falls into that upper range of an NBA role player, but who maybe does bring reliable enough offense and defense that he can displace a guy like Aaron Wiggins and Isaiah Joe there. So I think there are other levers for the OKC Thunder to pull. I'll be interested to see, what that looks like and what they do. Obviously, they've got another, lottery pick coming their way this summer. I don't know if there's much value for them in that sort of range in terms of the draft, whether they'll just use that as, a trade piece, maybe with some of these other guys mixed in. But I'm keen to hear your thoughts, Drew, because for me, like, if they did go and make like a Giannis type swing with Chet, I'd be questioning, Sam Presti and almost the way that they held or the lack of nerve, I should say that it shows if they, were looking at that rather than looking at some of the things around the outskirts of their team.
Signing Giannis would scream out um, desperate. And I don't think OKC are in that position. They won a championship already. You look at the age of this team, there's not one guy. The only guy in the 30s is Caruso. Everyone else is like 27 years old or younger. Giannis doesn't fit the timeline of this team. So and then you have to question like him and Shea need the ball in their hands. Does that fit? So, whatever they decide to do, they have flexibility because they have that draft pick that you mentioned. Um, and yeah, and Hardasine could come off the books. I think that if Chet is really your guy, move him to center. You move off a Hardasine, you open up a load of cash. I just think there's no need to panic. You got Jared McCain that's going to come back and bring you value because he gets a full training camp with this team. We got a guy that you don't ever hear about that's been on the roster for 2 years in Nikola Topic. He was a top 5 player in Europe, has just had some unfortunate situations happen with cancer and with ACLs, but you would like to think that he's coming into the season healthy next year. He's only um, I don't know how old he is, 20 years old. So this team has a lot of options moving forward that they're not in a position to panic. Even how they are already set, they're a Western Conference finalist. So, I mean, like you mentioned, you just got to shave some fat around the edges. Their mindset has to be more strategic. They're not in a position to swing for the fences like a lot of these other teams. I'm waiting to see how every other team looks first, and then you kind of adjust accordingly, which they're in the position to do.
Absolutely, and again, as I mentioned it before, we can act like the series wasn't fine margins, but it really was. Like, effectively the OKC Thunder, momentum wise, and maybe a Luke Cornett block away from still, really pushing this game seven close and it not feeling like the sort of blowout that it did feel like in the end. But that Luke Cornett block, Drew, brings me perfectly on to what won the San Antonio Spurs this series, because Wemby had a brilliant series. It goes without saying. I've been seeing him mentioned in the same breath as like Michael Jordan in terms of gravity and in terms of how much he changes another team's scheme, and him maybe even going beyond that. Some people are questioning now, because this guy is just an absolute freak. And again, as I mentioned in the last episode, like freak almost doesn't do it justice because of how technically good he is with a basketball too. But to me, the reason the Spurs won the series was because of how all the other guys brought it around Wemby as well. Wemby had his up and down moments within the perspective of Wemby's greatness, but I look at a guy like Devin Vassell, who was so consistent, especially from 3 point range. In fact, like, it's kind of ironic, really. The one game Devin Vassell wasn't consistent from 3 point range in was this game seven. Julian Champagny then stood into that fold and 6 from 10 from three in this game seven. I heard a lot of mention, sort of, I guess, in people trying to sort of nitpick anything that would be wrong with the Spurs about maybe their wings not having that kind of level of defense that they'd need. But to me, Devin Vassell and Julian Champagny as the starters brought enough defense where maybe even there's a conversation you can have where, as long as they're big body guys and they're playing on the wing, you can kind of hide big body, maybe not plus defenders on the wings, as long as it's not your point of attack guys, and as long as it's not a really heavy footed center in the paint that teams can just find a way to drag out and blow by. The Spurs, of course, don't have that in Wemby, and they definitely don't have it in the guards. De'Aaron Fox really, really grew into the series after me sort of questioning whether they should have just left Dylan Harper as the starter there. Dylan Harper recovered from, I think it was a hamstring issue, the Dylan Harper thing, wasn't it? Which is it's
Hip
crazy, really,
flexor or
how
something.
yeah,
It wasn't clear.
yeah, maybe a little bit higher up than the hamstring then, but I mean, God, in game six and game seven, he did not look like a guy who was dealing with any kind of pain or any kind of injury, because he was brilliant. And the fact that he's 20 years old terrifies me, because he's the kind of point guard that I love, and I really hope to see him perform at that level for the next 15 years. And then Stefan Castle, I've not even mentioned within that realm of guards as well, another guy whose game I just absolutely love watching. Keldon Johnson, another one of those big body wings they can bring off the bench and not necessarily be a negative defender. It just felt like guys up and down this roster, Drew, were able to find contributing moments, and we might just look at that Luke Cornett chase down block as one of the things that won the Spurs this game seven.
It felt like game seven, the Spurs had everybody rolling at the same time, which during the series, it felt like, they couldn't get everyone on the same page or the same game. You talk about someone like Keldon Johnson, who probably had his best game. He had been very inconsistent. Fox had been up and down, and a lot of that high ankle sprain as well that's not talked about. Like, he's a guy that's dependent on elusiveness, athleticism. That bothers you. Also with Cornette, the minutes that Wemby was on the bench, the plus minus of Cornette was awful. But he stepped up just in the nick of time, with that defensive effort. That is why you have guys like him and Harrison Barnes on the team. That's championship experience. That's championship winning plays. Whereas maybe some other younger guy, they just kind of give up on the play, or they put their head down for a second and it's too late to get back into it. But to be able to challenge that, I like to think that this is a team that has. I think you can just kind of throw the inexperienced narrative out the trash. You made it all the way here. You're experienced now. You know what it takes to get to a final. You've been in a 7-game series. You've seen adversity. You've had injuries. So you've dealt with everything. You've even seen your best player get kicked out of a game in Wemby. So you've played a game without him. There's really nothing that this team hasn't seen. And they are prime, man. Like, in reality, they're playing with house money, because they're a team that probably you could project having more opportunities getting as far. Whereas the Knicks, you don't know, because the East is so up in the air. Their team is older as well when you look at the New York Knicks. So there's more urgency from New York side. So if I'm San Antonio, I'm coming to this finals like, hey, we have nothing to lose, everything to gain. And that is a great position to be in, especially if you're young.
Absolutely, yeah. I was just looking at their payroll there as well to sort of almost try and project the next few years. I mean, there's Wembanyama is eligible for a 5-year, 250 million rookie max extension. I absolutely wouldn't be surprised at all to see him get that. So maybe that's where a few of these things do start to get tight in terms of second aprons and CBAs and stuff. But they've got 19 million in Harrison Barnes that they'll probably let go of in this off season. He's on an expiring contract. 14 million nearly in Kelly Olynyk's expiring contract as well. These guys that were veterans and clearly important. You've been in locker rooms, Drew, so you'll know how important veteran presence can be, especially to a locker room of young guys. It was really cool to see, guys like Bismack Biyombo throughout this playoff series really sort of speaking life into Wembanyama because I was talking to a friend about this the other week and saying, I basically can't believe the amount of centers and experienced centers that the Spurs have on this roster. And actually, I feel like all of them are there to just kind of impart some wisdom onto Wemby to, almost keep him grounded. We know how cerebral Wemby is. We know how much he thinks of the game. So it feels almost like they've plugged these almost different encyclopedias of basketball. Mason Plumlee for the playmaking, Bismack Biyombo for the size and rebounding, Kelly Olynyk for the outside shooting. You can see all the different roles that these guys could bring to Wembanyama's game and how much he would be able to soak up from that. And then outside of that, De'Aaron Fox is already on a max scale contract. Devin Vassell is on a big contract, but one that I don't think looks bad after this playoff series. Keldon Johnson making good money for an NBA role player. Dylan Harper's got years and years left, of course, on his rookie contract. Same with Stephon Castle, same with Carter Bryan. This is a team that at some point might have to start thinking about second aprons and CBAs, but I come back to that point you made, Drew, about playing with house money, where I don't think this team really has to do a ton of thinking about any of the core parts of their roster for a little while now. In fact, I only see ways in which there's guys who maybe didn't get to have much of a say in this playoff series, or guys that may come into the fold, sort of younger guys from outside of draft picks that they've got now over the next few years, who could look at a place like Harrison Barnes' minutes in this playoff series and go, oh, I fancy myself to go and pick up those minutes and help this team out even more.
I mean, they're in a very unique situation. Their top three players are all on rookie deals. So they have a little bit of wiggle room. You don't have to extend Wemby until after next year.
Mm.
So, and they're all in order because it's Wemby, then it's Castle, then it's Harper. So this thing is mapped out perfectly. And once once Harper is up for his deal, Vassell comes off the books. Once Wemby is up for his deal, Johnson comes off the books. So their books is organized like perfect. And I love that point that you brought about those bigs, because you brought that up a couple of episodes ago of why maybe they were too fat at the center position, but you hit the nail right on the head. That's San Antonio pouring into their young star with three different personalities that they can all wrap their arms around him and pouring him into different ways, whether it's whether it's providing competition for him in practice, as you look at the experience championship player that Cornette is, or the two veterans that Bismack and Mason Plumlee brings. They have personalities that obviously you and I don't know, but that they know that will be able to support a young star that's carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. And shout out to the GM there at San Antonio, the guys behind the scenes upstairs.
Absolutely, yeah, and really excited to see what they can continue to do over the next few years. But first of all, Drew, having seemingly climbed the mountain, I love seeing the emotion coming out of Victor Wembanyama after the game. By the way, to when you said before about how this is not a team that necessarily needs to have that inexperienced narrative anymore because they've now made it, and that I think was a show of that from Victor Wembanyama. He knows that that was the series of his lifetime. Really, yes, the New York Knicks series will now go on to be this. And I'm sure if they manage to come out against the New York Knicks and win this thing, that you'll see even more of that emotion from Victor Wembanyama. But this is the point where they have scaled that mountain now. They are here at the summit. They are in the big leagues. And look at a guy like De'Aaron Fox at 28 years old. Those are the guys, are the veterans on the roster now who are going to be there for years and years to come still, and helping Wemby and some of those other guys. But even, as I say, maybe inexperienced guys who might come into the team from that point of view, because we've seen a little bit of that with the OKC Thunder, even that, maybe some of the guys who were important to the team last year were able to, help a few guys in playoff series this season as well. So I'm so excited to see what the Spurs do in the future, but obviously the small matter of an NBA Finals matchup with the New York Knicks to come. And I'm just keen to hear from you, Drew, around, predictions for this thing. We'll do predictions of how far this series goes just before we sign off from this podcast. But, in terms of X factors in this series, I'm definitely liking the talker here around, how well OG Anunoby defends Victor Wembanyama in the minutes that they've been matched up against each other, because that's the kind of thing that I think is really intriguing they can be looking out for. I hope this injury to Mitchell Robinson doesn't take away too many of his powers in terms of, what he can do around the rim, both rims really. Obviously defensively maybe the bigger challenge for him in this one, but he's a big guy who's a great rebounder and a great shot blocker, so he will be really important to anything that Victor Wembanyama does around the rim and deterring that. And then beyond that, one of the things that I loved about the San Antonio Spurs, and where I maybe don't think they've got enough credit, and it's actually become a reductive narrative about the OKC Thunder, is this roster is just absolutely full of defensive disruptors. There's so many big bodies on this team. When I saw Keldon Johnson checking in Game 7, I was like, has Keldon Johnson put size on? Because his body looks so much bigger than I remember it
He's
looking.
huge.
Exactly, like there are so many guys here who feel like they are genuinely like top level defensive disruptors. Well, if they're thinking that they are sort of born into this chest out, I would be looking to the other side, because the New York Knicks are the most defensive disruptive team, big bodies, chest out defensive guys that you could possibly come up against in the NBA. So it's another reason that I think this matchup is really really attractive, and maybe even brings a slightly different angle to what the OKC Thunder series could have brought if it was OKC versus New York. I think there's going to be some seriously high level defense played in this one.
This is a very, very high level matchup just because of the options that both coaches are equipped with. I think it's going to come down to that. The X's and O's. The coaching battle is going to be so important. This is a very different matchup from OKC and San Antonio, because Cat to me is the X factor. He can bring Wemby from out that paint. And if he's shooting well this series, that could be issues for San Antonio. His decision making is going to be critical offensively. He can't be, uh, you know, he has to be smart with the ball, make quick decisions, know when to use DHOs whenever Wemby is sagging off, know when to take that three ball, know when to attack him off the dribble and try to get him in foul trouble. Yeah, there's just so many cross matchups that you can look at. That's why it makes this series so unpredictable. It can go in so many different ways. I could see 4 or 5 guys winning, you know, finals MVP. OG is so important to New York because what he can do defensively to Wemby, and then offensively as well, of how well he's been playing, shooting 50% from above the arc. Then you got the X factor Shamit as well. If Hart is struggling, you can bring him in, that you can have confidence in, that could be an X factor. You're going to have to guard. If you're involved in this series, you are going to have to guard. I was impressed with Cat in the last series. Defensively, he wasn't picking up a lot of those dumb fouls. He was solid on that end. So that's what I mean about proper basketball, is that defensively, you have to be on the court and guard. You won't be able to hide. Someone like Brunson, you got to guard somebody, because those San Antonio guards are just lethal. It's not going to be many options for help, whereas you look at OKC, maybe you can sag off of Dort a little bit. You can look at Hart and say maybe you can help off of him, but how he burnt Cleveland in Game 3 makes you kind of second guess that option. So it's just so many scenarios, so intriguing. I don't really, until you ask me the question, I still don't know. But one thing I am certain about is I won't be surprised if both of these teams won the NBA Finals.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's going to be, on a knife edge, similar to how those Western Conference finals were. So go on then, Drew. Give me your sort of X factor of this series. As I say, I like that talk about OG Anunoby and maybe whether he can be a guy that can at least, cool down Victor Wembanyama in a way that maybe OKC never quite managed to crack throughout that Western Conference final series. But who would you have as your X factor for this one?
For me, it's Fox. With San Antonio, you look back, he has just been so up and down the entire playoffs. He'll have 3 days to, and this is before the ankle injury. Someone on my Facebook just posted a highlight package of Fox in Sacramento, and you almost forget how explosive, how
Hmm.
electric he was. And I want him to play like a 28-year-old when it comes to decision making, but I want him to play like the young Fox when it comes to just causing havoc offensively in transition, in the half court, getting feet inside the paint. And if he could bring some consistency, he for me is the X factor of this entire series. Because again, he towers over Bronson. He's 6'4", especially if he can get that shot going as well. And I think he will. I think he will. You will see the best version of Fox in this series, and that's why I have San Antonio going all the way to Game 7. This series is made for 7 games, and I think ultimately San Antonio will get it done at home. I think both teams will win a game on each floor. I think that New York, their best bet to being able to win this series is getting Game 1, which they're prime. They're rested to do so, but I think that it will be more rust than rest. 8 days is just such a long time. You got OG, Shamit, all those guys shooting over 50% from beyond the arc. You got you got Brunson. You also have your other guy as well shooting 50% on pull up jumpers. That doesn't get better with sitting. You just lose that all of that momentum. And I think just from that standpoint, they lose Game 1, which will ultimately have them lose the series.
This is interesting then, Drew. You've rolled your two predictions into one there, so I'll roll mine into them as well because mine are different to yours. So this will
Okay.
certainly be interesting if we're going all crossover the pond bold
Yeah.
predictions as we had going during the regular season. My X factor for the series, basically built off the biggest narrative I think that came from the OKC Thunder series was that the OKC Thunder didn't have anybody to supplement the scoring of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and I think that New York have a couple of options here. I expect a big series from Cat. As you said, it will basically be his job to drag Wemby out the paint. I expect those other wing guys to have games where they are really supplementing Brunson's scoring. But to me, the Jared McCain type figure in this series once again is Landry Shamet. Maybe it will be that his last series was the one that was his kind of like playoff moment almost. But I think he's going to have a really important part to play in this series in terms of if the starters maybe don't quite have it going on any given night, what's the bench going to be able to come in and bring? And we've seen that San Antonio Spurs have had that depth throughout this playoff series. I think depth is going to be so important in this final series as well. So I'm going to go with Landry Shamet as my X factor in this, and then different to you, I'm actually going to go with New York in 6 here. People are talking about
Mm.
the fact that we might have to shut down New York City for the night if they do win it in Madison Square Garden. I can kind of see that. I just think it's New York's time. Yes, I'm throwing out the San Antonio inexperienced narrative, but I do think this will be the one where like they scale the mountain. They were beaten up throughout this 7 game series with the OKC Thunder. They've probably already feel like they've kind of conquered their giant almost because a lot of us been saying throughout the season that whoever wins the West will probably go on to win the NBA Finals. But I don't know. There's just something. It's almost like a head and heart thing. I think my head is probably telling me that your prediction of San Antonio in 7 is right, or that at the very least it'll go 7 games, then it'll be a puncher's chance for either team from there. But I've just got this feeling about New York, and if they were going into that game 6, 3-2 up, Madison Square Garden on their side, that playoff atmosphere is the sort of thing that I think could just drown the San Antonio Spurs really. And there are a few guys, as much as the Spurs do have the depth, where I'm like, will you be able to cope in that environment? And the answer may well be yes, and I wouldn't be surprised if it is because I think they've got a deep mental bag, the San Antonio Spurs. But yeah, something in my heart is telling me it could be New York's time here.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm not surprised by that one bit, and I could easily come on your side of the fence and argue the same and support all of that. That's what makes it so intriguing and interesting. And you better believe I'm going to be up late every playoff game series for this finals as early as Wednesday night. Looking forward to pulling an all-nighter and watching that. Looking forward to covering game 3 and game 5 of this one as
Nice.
well. So yeah, man, I'm excited about it. I'm ready to get this thing going. Like I said, you couldn't ask for two better teams. New York City, the Big Apple, the bright lights. Like, what else would you want? You got the historic San Antonio Spurs, who's won 5 championships already. Like, it is a match made in heaven. And more importantly, you have a young star in Wembyamba who is embracing everything about the NBA that so many players have just like nonchalantly, put on this facade like it doesn't matter. I don't care. He's bringing that back. And then you got Knicks where you got a team full of Rough Riders who, I would like to say that all are equipped with the same mentality as Wemby. So the NBA could have not asked for two better representatives.
Absolutely, and a great matchup for the neutrals because I don't think there's going to be as much of a villain arc in this one as there was maybe in that OKC Thunder one. Yeah, I'm really excited. I'm actually going over to the Isle of Man for the TT. It's partly why I've got the Boston Celtics t-shirt on today is because I'm staying with my friend. I mentioned him a lot on this podcast. So shout out to Ross. He's a big Boston Celtics fan. He listens to the pod as well. So I'm hoping he'll be tuning to this one, and me and him will be staying up late for a good few of those games. I'm there for 5 nights, so basically games 1 to 3. Me and Ross will be able to, tune into. Very excited to watch it with him. He's a big reason that I got into basketball, so a big reason why I'm here today. This is sure to be an exciting NBA Finals series. I'm so excited to continue to chop up with Drew. We've said we may do some sort of quick hitter episodes throughout this. I will be taking my podcast gear over to the Isle of Man as well to make sure that we can do that for you guys. The odd 10 to 15 minutes here and there, whenever me and Drew can make it work, we will bring those to you. Which leaves me just to say, Drew, lead us out, my man.
This is what we've been waiting for, the finale. Make sure you guys lock in. Stay up with us as well. Give us your thoughts on social media. But before all of that, just do us a favor. Make sure you go subscribe, like, support, all of that. It really helps out a lot. But until then, we will be here to give you all of the ins and out of the NBA Finals. Signing off, Drew and Josh. Peace out. See you later.